Well, my name is Marquetta Johnson. I'm a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and my family hails from Macon, Georgia. That's a little bit uh, outside of that metropolitan area. I grew up in a household of seamstresses, tailors, and quilters. My mother was an excellent seamstress. She made wedding gowns and she made prom outfits and she made just many beautiful things for me and for my sister to wear. We were all very popular because if there's a party, I could just run home and tell my mom and she'd whip me up a mini skirt and I was ready to go. And so that was my foundational knowledge base, being in a home with people that use needles and loved fabric. And so, I hear people oftentimes say, quilters are like hoarders, but I say quilters are collectors. And we go after that beautiful fabric and that we collect fabric from different eras. And our quilts are historical objects that tell a lot about what's going on in society just based on the designs and the colors that you find in the fabric. Now, I call myself a multisensory artist because of the fact that I try to create artwork that can be appreciated by people that can see, but also I try to consider people that are living with no sight or low sight as I create my work. So the question came to me, what is beautiful for a person that has a visual impairment? Something that has texture, something that has weight, and something that has temperature. And if you're using embellishments, you'll find that if you use shells and glass beads, they are cooler than buttons and some other kinds of things. And whereas people that are sighted, that interact with the quilt, they're able to see all these beautiful things. But for a person that is living with a visual impairment, to be able to recognize the different textures, the different temperatures, and the different weights of the things that you have on your quilt. Now, being a multisensory artist, I can't be finicky about people touching my quilts because I want you to engage with them. So, I give people full access to my artwork just so that they're able to truly experience all the layers of creativity that I'm trying to incorporate in what it is that I do. Now, I'm a STEAM-ready teaching artist, and I have been blessed to be able to take quilting into the classroom and teach children about math and technology and engineering through quilting. Quilters are mathematicians. And here at the show, you're going to see quilts that it's quilters with a PhD in quilting and that really know how to use color, line, shape, form, and texture to be able to tell their story, even without words. Now, a multisensory artist, this whole idea came to me as I worked with students from the Center for the Visually Impaired. Going in the door, I noticed that the things that they had on the wall were black and white or black and neon green, because high contrast is what you could put in a quilt that makes your quilt more accessible to people that wear glasses, people that are living with low vision. So I see myself as a multisensory artist trying to do quilts that appeal to your vision, quilts that appeal to your touch. And this fall, I'm going to be going to Utah State University in their chaos lab, that's what they call their technology lab, to learn how to put sound into my quilts so that people could engage with them just by touching them and hearing what it is that I want to share about my quilts. Now, these are some of the tools of my trade. I love embellishments. And my grandmother, the first thing that my grandmother taught me how to make was a quilt embellishment called a yo-yo. And my grandmother said, "Child, you too fast. I'm going to teach you something that's going to help you be still." Now, this was in the 80s. And this was before I even understood what a mindfulness practice was. But as time went on, I saw that my grandmother gave me a mindfulness practice with quilting. She gave me something to help me learn how to center myself and how to be still. And this is what I try to take into the schools. I taught over 1,000 children how to use a needle, how to thread a needle, and how to make yo-yos. And I might have some in this. But I use hand-dyed fabrics that I dye myself. I like buttons, I like beads, I like to put yo-yos on things, I like hexagons. I just love layers of creativity, and I try to put this into the work that I do. Now, go back to the 80s. I was doing workshops for different quilt guilds, teaching people how to do how to use fiber reactive Procyon dyes. Those are cold water dyes. And I would teach all of these people about dyeing. Simultaneously, Georgia was having a water war with Florida. And here I was teaching all these people how to use this water. And so it dawned on me I needed to find a more sustainable way to work as an artist. So I started using products that were considered pigments instead of dyes. I used Jacquard airbrush colors for fabric. I used Createx airbrush colors for fabric. And I used Jacquard textile paints in doing the work that I do. It's eco-friendly because when you're using this airbrush color to do your dyeing with, you could dye 10 yards of fabric with less than 2 liters of water, because all you're doing is taking the product and diluting it with water, and you're directly applying it to the fabric with squeeze bottles and pouring and stuff. And then once it dries, you're heat setting it. You're not rinsing it with all of that water. Now, I encourage anyone that buys hand-dyed fabrics to place their fabric in water with a mild soap, like a Castile or something like that, and let it sit for a moment, just to make sure that it isn't gonna run. But with my dyeing, this product, the manufacturers say that it cures in 28 days. So what I do is I heat set it and I dye it a year off. So the fabrics that I have here today, I dyed those fabrics in 2020 and 2021. Now, I just wanted to give you a brief uh, I wanted to open the door to my studio and let you see actually where I'm doing this dyeing. Now, I'm doing my tie-dyeing and my hand dyeing in the little space in the apartment that they have for the washer and dryer. So it's really small. And then you'll see in the middle, you'll see how I create my bundles and I directly apply the dye, but I'm not trying to do a ton at a time. I'm giving each fat quarter, each half yard, its own time, its own love, and that helps me to achieve really vibrant, strong colors because it's just like I was cooking. I'm attending to every bundle, just as if you were cooking burgers and you're taking care of each burger. The last picture on the left, I think, is a picture of where I actually do my printing and my stamping and my stenciling. In my wildest dreams, I hope for a 10-foot table one day. But right now, I'm just working off of this card table. And it is really sufficient for what it is that I'm doing. Now, I'm an artist that works with a purpose in mind. I enjoy what I do. I am inspired by what I do, but I want to use quilting as a way to make the world a better place. In the schools that I service, they're what you call Title I schools. So a lot of the kids at these schools come from families that have modest incomes. A lot of the kids spend a lot of time on video games, and not very much time outside or having different pastimes. So one of the things that I'm hoping that I could do with my work is to be able to take my work and share it with young people and inspire them to take on the idea of doing something creative. You might not necessarily want to sew, but you could just be inspired by being amongst creative people and their work to find a way that you could share your voice as well. Now, as I had said before, my grandmother showed me how quilting can promote this mindfulness, this stillness, this quiet. And it's something that I really, really appreciate, even though she's no longer with me. Now, my grandmother taught me how to make a yo-yo in her own style. Many people have seen yo-yos made, and it's a circle, and people turn in the edge, and they sew, and it's a little space in the middle, and it's very beautiful. What my grandmother did, though, she didn't turn the edges under. She just created the circle and sewed it, and it had a little fuzzy navel. And so I said, well, what can I do to take this to another level? So I started doing multiple yo-yos and stacking them. I started using beads and buttons to embellish them. And this particular yo-yo was a discovery that I found that it just really excited me, and that is that you could actually sew with pom-poms. Now, most teachers, when I go to schools, they hate pom-poms. They think they're just so crafty, not necessarily arty. But when I discovered that you could actually sew a pom-pom onto something, it opened the way for me to do a lot of interesting things with pom-poms. Now, this yo-yo evolution began in me once my grandmother planted that seed about making a yo-yo. I do yo-yos out of all kinds of fabrics, and I embellish them with glass beads. I even use plastic because we know plastic is going to be around forever. So when I'm making my quilts, I'm always thinking about the longevity of them and stuff. So I use glass beads, plastic, wood, shells, and I stack yo-yos in different sizes and put them together. And then also I love making yo-yos like my grandmother made, and I think I have a quilt here that shows how my grandmother made her yo-yos, and they're really, really tactile with a lot of texture. Now, dare to be different. Behind me, over my shoulder, I have a quilt that is made of yo-yos, but before I started making the yo-yo, I would sew strips together. And then once I sewed my strips together, then what I would do, I would cut out the yo-yo, and it would be 2 colors. I would tack it at the ends before I would start making it so that the 2 pieces of fabric wouldn't come apart. And I just loved making those yo-yos that had 2 colors, and some of them even have 3. You see a hexagon. Someone taught me how to do that at a show similar to this. And I knew that once I learned how to do a hexagon, and especially if I could do it where all 6 sides were the same, that I could use that as a way to teach children about geometry and about tessellations. And so I say dare to be different. I say, do something with these ideas, these things that we learn along the way that will add something wonderful to what we're doing as quilters. Now, my grandmother said to me one day, Marquetta, I'm gonna sew something on my quilt. Now, my grandmother was 85 years old before she saw a quilt magazine. She just knew, I'm gonna sew something on something. So she had her own technique. She wasn't doing needle turn applique. What she would do would be, she would draw a shape on the fabric. She would take 2 pieces of fabric, right sides together, and she would sew around her shape. She would trim it close to the edge, put a slit in the back, turn it inside out, and she would sew it on her quilts. But what I did with her technique was, I started taking that little applique piece, and once I slit it, I put batting inside of it. And I would quilt on those little objects like it was a little mini quilt. And then I would apply it to my quilt. But that was just another way that I was able to take what my grandmother gave me and built on it to preserve and to maintain our family's legacy of creativity. Now, the quilt, the long quilt with the chickens on it, this quilt has some of my sister's quilt blocks as the little quilts that I'm hanging on the clothesline. My sister is no longer with me, but my sister, before she passed, gave me everything. All of her blocks, all of her UFOs, all of her fabric, all of her sewing machines. And so, again, this is one of my missions, to take what my sister gave me and take it to the next level. So you see how beautiful her little blocks are as little mini quilts on my quilt. It's just so exciting and outstanding. And the next quilt is a picture of my grandmother's house. My grandmother lived in what we call in the South a shotgun house. And that was a kind of a house that was built so that if you stood in the door and you shot through the door with a shotgun, the bullet or the little thing would go out of the back door. You know, it was just 3 rooms, but it was a little house full of love. Now, I put all of these hexagons and yo-yos in the front because my grandmother had the reputation in Macon of having one of the most beautiful gardens. And she had a garden kind of like a French garden where you just, I mean, everything is just growing wherever it's growing, you know. She had perennials and she had annuals, and so stuff would just come up. And she would, you know, take a bit, transplant it over here, over there. And so her yard was just like that, just full of stuff. Now, one of my missions, as I said before, is growing the next generation of quilters and crafters. When I travel around the country and I visit guilds and I talk with people, I see a lot of people my age, you know, but rarely do I see a 20-something. And I might see a teen whose grandmother or mother brought them, you know, but I want to be instrumental in really bringing quilting into the classroom as a 2-dimensional art form that is used in collage and all types of techniques that kids could really find joy in. And one of the things that really struck me with all of the places that I'm going, I'm finding more male quilters, more young boys that are interested in needles and sewing and the quietness of it. And so you'll see I have lots of pictures of young men sewing because I just want to show others that quilting is a art form that all people can find enjoyment in and use as a way of use as a means of creative expression. Now there are many schools in Georgia that I'm taking quilting to. Oftentimes we might do sewing, but then sometimes my hope is that I could get children to look at a quilt with a mathematical mindset, where they could see fractions, where they could see geometry, and they're able to use the language of mathematics to be able to describe what it is that they are doing. And so I had the opportunity to make paper quilt blocks with the whole 5th grade at the Lovett School. And it was an amazing experience. And you could tell from the various patterns that the children are showing that they were really inspired. Now, what I had done was I took a quilt from a local Georgia artist that was what you call an Underground Railroad quilt. You all might have seen those, but I say an Underground Railroad quilt is like a sampler of many different kinds of traditional blocks that people have used, not just in the South, but throughout the world of quilting. Another wonderful opportunity that I had was to be able to write a blog for young people for the Modern Quilt Guild about STEAM and STEM as it relates to quilting. So I did something about tessellations. I did something about strips and measurement, and that was about architecture. And then I did one about geometric transformations, which is just how shapes move on a 2-dimensional plane. And so I would write these blogs that would talk about how we see these types of things in nature, in industry, and in quilting. I also use my quilting skill set to try to bring comfort and solace to people that are grieving with the loss of a family member or friend to AIDS. And so I work with the AIDS Memorial Quilt Foundation, traveling and working with groups that are interested in developing panels for their loved ones that might have passed from AIDS. And the AIDS Memorial Quilt is the largest piece of folk art in the world. It is comprised of over 60,000 panels that are 3 feet by 8 feet, but that are put together in larger segments to create these big quilts. A lot of it is simply applique, a lot of it is quilting. And I've seen people put all kinds of memorabilia from their family members onto a quilt. One day I even saw a quilt that someone had actually appliqued a bowling ball to it, you know, and it was amazing. So this is one of the other things that I do with my my quilting expertise. Now, I'm also a textile artist. I dye and I print and I paint and I stencil on fabric, and I sell it to other quilters. And I kind of liken it to being a background singer, okay? The quilter is the star in the middle of the stage, singing or dancing, and I'm a background singer, doing the bop, do bop, bop, and then I fade into the background and I quietly go home. And I really love the idea of having other quilters to take my fabric and to be able to do something with it. Now, in 1980, I met Faith Ringgold when I was living in San Antonio, Texas. This was when she first started doing her story quilts. Just to show my appreciation, when I went to her workshop, I took her several pieces of hand-dyed fabric. And she loved my fabric so much that since 1980, she's been using my hand-dyed and tie-dye fabrics in her quilts. So, as a background singer that is in the background harmonizing, Faith today has worked all over the world. Someone just recently went to Oslo and they took a picture in a museum of one of her quilts that had my fabric in it. And it was just so exciting to know that my fabric is in museums all around the world. And she did put my name on a couple of the quilts, but nevertheless, I'm just so happy to have added a layer of creativity to what it is that she's doing. And she's taking this all around the world, sharing with people, and I get to support her as a quilter in her goals as a maker. Now, I say half suitcase will travel. As a person living with a disability, using a wheelchair for mobility, it's not real easy traveling here and there. I've traveled so much that I kind of have a system, and I know that kindness and good manners will get you in any door, okay? So, you know, I am, you know, very accommodating and kind and patient when I'm traveling. And because of that, I think it helps me to be able to go and travel on any airlines and it be a successful trip. Now, in the fall, for the past 5 years, I've been going to Utah State University. I teach a methods class. That's a class for aspiring art teachers. And because of the fact, and I think I might have left this out, I'm a museum educator, okay, uh, at a fine art museum. And as a teacher and artist, I have to teach so many different kinds of things that I have so many lesson plans and so many projects that I'm able to go to Utah State and share them with other aspiring art educators, and they're able to take what I've worked out and add it to their toolbox. So you'll see I have a picture of one of my trips in Utah, because whenever I'm there, I try to go to a state park or a national park to see all of the beautiful mountains and scenery that is there. And the last picture you'll see, I went to Flint, Michigan after the water crisis, okay? And I saw people that were determined to live their lives in the best way that they could. People that loved creativity and that weren't being adversely affected mentally and emotionally because of what they were having to go through. So I took my work there, I did an artist talk, and it was an amazing experience. Quilting is beautiful to me because everywhere I go, I hear quilt stories. Everybody has a quilt story. And as a quilter, it's an icebreaker. Soon as people find out that I'm a quilter, then they tell me their stories about their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts that quilted. And it's a bonding moment. And I'm just so appreciative of it. Now, when I'm going into schools, I do individual projects with students, but also I do collaborative work. One of the things as a STEAM-ready artist, I'm trying to encourage children in collaboration. So we'll do a lot of collaborative projects. So the long one that you see is a view from a reservoir in Utah. And it has native plants and birds, and it was just such a interesting and exciting experience to work with kids doing this, teaching them how to make yo-yos, teaching them how to sew so that they could make bird nests and all kinds of interesting things. And so this is one of the other things that I do as I travel and share in schools. This last picture is a view from Logan Canyon. And when you're going up to the University of Utah, you could kind of feel it in your ears that you're going to a higher elevation. You're surrounded by these beautiful mountains and this wonderful, wonderful nature that you see. When I was there, and I've never seen this before, I saw moose. And it was just so exciting. I didn't know they were so big. I didn't know their antlers were so wide. And that's one of the perks of being able to travel. You get to see a new sky, new trees, new animals, and interesting people. As I had mentioned before, I love teaching children about needles and about sewing. When I'm in Utah, I have a sewing machine that I could take to schools, and I could give students an opportunity to use a sewing machine. In front of me in the middle picture, you'll see a whole bunch of yo-yos that the classes that had come in that morning, had made yo-yos. And I showed them how to sew a big bead on them, and I wasn't critical. Some of them weren't quite circular. They had moved into being angular, but I was just so pleased and happy to have kids with a needle in their hand. That's what meant the most to me. And then you'll see this young artist. I wanted to especially share about the experience that I had with her, because it was in November, it was almost time for Christmas. And so all of the students that were in this particular class got a chance to sew. And many of them said, I know what I'm going to ask for Christmas. I want a sewing machine. Or they say that they wanted a trip to go to the quilt store in Logan and buy them some quilting supplies. So I feel that in Logan, I have laid a foundation for dozens of children to be makers, to be crafts people, and quilters, and people that sew. Now, the quilts that I make with kids oftentimes aren't just beautiful patterns. A lot of times I use quilting as a vehicle for teaching the curriculum that the teacher wants to be able to share, and that's called arts integration. And so what I do is, in these particular quilts, the bigger one, we were studying the life cycle of plants. So I did this little quilt that shows plants going from a seed to a flower. The smaller quilt, I did that in a situation where we were studying about birds that lived in our community. I felt really positive after this workshop because kids would come up to me in the hallway and say, I saw a cardinal in my backyard, or I saw a blue jay, or I even saw a finch. So quilting can be used as a way to share foundational information with children, and I'm just so pleased to have that opportunity to be able to do it. Now, I also work with children that are on the autism spectrum, and sometimes I have been to schools where children on the spectrum, or they might have an aide, and their aide is doing the artwork, not the kids. But when I go into a school, I'm not being critical. I'm not saying you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. I would show them the process, but then I would kind of give them the freedom to take it where you want. Now, when I went to this school, the funny thing about it was I had given them a supply list. And I asked them to get burlap. That's what we were going to work on. But what ended up happening was they got some kind of netting. And I was flabbergasted. But I went on, because that's what we do. I went on and I had fabric scraps and we had canvas paper. And these are some of the quilts that my students that are on the autism spectrum made. I love sharing them because I saw that they think differently, they might move differently, but inside of themselves, they are makers. They are lovers of beauty. And even though they might not be verbal, they are still hearing me. And they're being inspired by the quilts I bring. And these are some of the things that they came up with, with really deep messages and wonderful ways of putting things together. I had mentioned earlier that I'm a multi-sensory artist. Now, I had the opportunity to have an amazing adventure with first graders at an elementary school in my neighborhood. They do what they call explorations. So they came to the museum and had a workshop with me. And then I came over to their school and did a three-week residency. And during that time, we made this. We didn't make the cabinet, we bought the cabinet. But the cabinet is filled with things that the children made that could be like a fidget. Okay, now a fidget, there you can find different kinds. There's this fidget that was really popular called a spinner. Okay, all kids love them. Okay, and then they had these little things like an hourglass that had some kind of colored oil in it that would come out slowly. And students that live on the spectrum, with students with learning disabilities, the teacher could use fidgets to kind of help them to still themselves for a moment. But what we did was we created a lot of unique, different kinds of things for children to be engaged with. Okay, in the long part, we made rain sticks that make sounds. We took hangers and made them into a string instrument. We made snow globes, and on the top, you'll see they painted fabric, and I made what we call friendship pillows. And so they're big enough for you and a couple of friends to sit on and read. And so they put these in all of the reading stations for the first grade, and the sensory cart was able to be rolled throughout the school, and different classes could have an opportunity to have it visit with them for a while. In my job at the museum, I'm a teaching artist, and I work with students when they come for a visit to the galleries, and the teacher might ask for a hands-on experience to go with that. Now, another thing that the museum gave me an opportunity to do was to create touch objects for their sensory room. So you see, I've made texture boards that have all kinds of different things on them that you could touch. I've taken books and made them tactile. And I've made quilts that could help students with visual impairments have a deeper understanding of the elements of art and the principles of design. And I use quilting and sewing to pursue that whole idea of creating hands-on touch objects for the museum. And this was a sensory commission I got from the museum. The museum has recently acquired 40 quilts from the Souls Grown Deep Foundation. And that's the people that promote and support the Gee's Bend Quilters of Alabama. So when the High Museum acquired these quilts, you know they don't want you to touch their quilts. I created touch objects with one of the Petway quilts that is called Birds Flying in the Air. And you'll see they use half square triangles to create that illusion of birds flying. This was a workshop that I did for the Center for the Visually Impaired. And you'll see the fidgets that I made. When I did those, not only was I thinking of something that you could touch and feel on, but something that you could interact. Because the orange one and the yellow one that are on opposite sides has marble in it and channels sewed in it. And so you get to push that marble through the channels going from one end to another. And I think that those make for really nice fidgets instead of plastic and just the kind you buy at the store. And the middle has some little objects that the children were making out of cardboard. And then you could see one of the students in her shawl that she made. I had put Velcro on the back of all of the pieces of cardboard that they embellished. And the shawl is made from Velcro, I think the female part. And then the little embellishments has the little male thing sticking out that they stick onto that Velcro. Now, from my experience working with the students at the Center for the Visually Impaired, I began to ask myself questions about what is beautiful to a person that has visual impairments. And so these are some of the things that I came up with doing. I would sew seed beads around the binding, so as they ran their hand across the quilt that they could feel that. I took the yo-yos and I might have put dozens of beads on them so that they have a real tactile kind of feel to them. I took the pom-poms and sewed them on. And with all of these quilts, they have layers of creativity that you could actually feel the different layers and textures and just create an amazing situation. As I mentioned before, I use quilts across the curriculum. I do quilts that have historical references. I do quilts that might be composed of geometric shapes and things. And then in the middle, this was something that I did around architecture for young artists. And this is, I call it Strip City, because each one of the buildings and the background and the street and the grass, they're all composed of strips. I'm a textile artist in addition to being a quilter and a teaching artist, and I use my tie-dye fabrics in my own work and I sell them as well. And here are some samples of them. Now in the middle, you'll see these racks with the fabric hanging over them. And I'm doing this in a really small space, and trying my very best not to get paint on the carpet. But I wasn't successful with that one. Other textile processes that I love doing, I love stamping and using block prints on fabric. And I have my own way that I approach this. Because of the fact that I'm paralyzed from my chest down, my balance is kind of off. And things that people that could stand could work on their work in ways to help them be successful. I had to develop some ways that I could do my work that I could be successful as well. I like to do wearable art from time to time. And you see I have the outfit. That came from a meeting that I was having with teaching artists. And so I told them that when I present to people, that I wear stuff that has lots of color in it. Because if you're talking over 18 minutes, sometimes people would kind of lose a little focus, okay? But if you're presenting and you have lots of color and you're moving and you're being expressive, you could keep people engaged. And so when I told my colleagues about the outfit, because when they would say they were presenting, I would say, well, what outfit are you gonna wear? So they thought it was a girl thing. But it wasn't. It's an artist thing, knowing how colors create a mood and affect your audience. So I always try to wear something really bright, and I make bright stuff. I did a demonstration of this at a quilt guild, and so I left this slide in there. Even though I'm not going to do a demonstration for you, so I just like to tell you a little bit about stenciling like a champion. If I were to go home with many of you, I'm sure that if I crept into your studio, I probably would see paint, dye, brushes, stencils, stamps, all kinds of things that you've collected over time to add to what it is that you're doing as a quilter. But sometimes you will buy them and you might not jump on them right then. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about stenciling that could help you stencil like a champion. Now, the first thing that I do is I use a repositionable spray adhesive on my stencils. That keeps them in place. I'm not, I don't just take that for granted. I'll put a little tape around the edge too. And when I'm stenciling, I try to resist the temptation to do these kind of movements, but I use this kind of movement because I'm sure you all know that with all of the quilting and art making techniques we have, the gesture is important. So when stenciling, if you're doing up and down, if you're just you getting a little paint at the beginning and you're being patient with your work, it will allow you to stencil like a champion. Now, if you're interested in purchasing any of my artwork, you could get in touch with me through my Gmail account. But I'm going to be here today, so you could personally come by my table and see some of my textiles. Now, my friends, I'm so happy to have people here to see my artwork, so much so that if you just come to my table and have a little viewing pleasure, I'm happy with that as well. But you know, artists live by their art, so we love to sell it as well. Now, I'd like to thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity to share about my artwork and to tell you a little bit about my family and our creative legacy that we're carrying on in my family. So, with that being said, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. And it is my hope that I was able to share something that you'll be able to take away and be inspired by. If nothing else, I hope you're inspired by the fact that I'm here, I'm sharing, and I'm feeling powerful and inspired by all of the beauty that is in this place that we're in. So think about me. You could always check out what I'm doing on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm always available to answer any questions or to talk or any concerns. So make sure that if you come by my table that you grab a card so you could have my phone number and email and everything, and that you could get back with me when you're ready to pursue some of these really amazing textile techniques. So I'd like to just thank you again, and I'm opening the floor for any questions that anyone might have. Yes?
Did you dye all of the fabrics?
Yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I've been dyeing now since about 1970. I had the amazing opportunity to actually work with a dyer from Africa that didn't know how to sew, and because I knew how to sew, she was willing to barter classes with me to for me to sew stuff for her. So, I kind of took it from there, taking her technique, building on it, eventually landing on my own technique of using airbrush colors for fabric with my dyeing.
What kind of fabric do you start with?
Well,
Can you repeat the question?
she asked me, what kind of fabric do I start with? When I'm working, I exclusively like to work with cottons and silks. I use many different kinds of cotton. I like flannel, I like corduroy, I use light canvas sometimes, but the majority of the time I'm using Kona cotton or I'm using print cloth or what my dyeing company calls quilter's fabric. Okay, so being that they call it quilter's fabric, it's easy to needle and it's easy to tear on the grain and all of those kind of things. But I dye and print and paint on my fabric, and I'm always hoping that a quilter or a maker would be intrigued by what I do and decide that they're going to take it to the next level in their work.
Yeah, I was going to say that they're so vibrant, first of all, and just lovely, but I wondered if you could tell us about the one that's just on the end there, because the colorations are so different from the other work.
This one, the question was, tell a little bit about this quilt because the coloration is different from the other quilts. Most of the time when I'm quilting, I quilt with what I love and with what excites me. However, it's a big wide world and a lot of people like many different things. So I went through a period to where I was doing a lot of stuff with brown. I love brown because brown makes you feel secure. Brown is a color that sort of, makes you feel protected, and it makes you think about family, and it makes me think about growth because good soil is kind of dark brown, and so I kind of fell into that brown for a moment, and I do that. At one point, everything had blue in it. At one point, everything had brown in it. And so, we have artist discretion, and I just will work in accord with what I'm feeling. But also, sometimes I think I might have threw a little brown in there because I want people to feel comfortable with the quilt. Sometimes really colorful stuff might not necessarily work with people's decor, but something that's neutral and muted, they might be excited about. Now, this particular quilt, I call it the Maverick quilt because there's a block in there that didn't turn out like the other blocks. And so I was feeling so, crazy about it. And then someone showed me an article about Maverick quilts, where quilters actually intentionally put something in there that doesn't go along with the pattern. And so I grabbed onto that really quick and I said, this is a Maverick quilt. It's not a mistake. I meant to have that happen. And also, I'll be here all 3 days of the festival. So stop by and give me a little chat. Thank you.